important. But I think without looking at the demand side, you will not find a good explanation. That I think is quite clear to me. And does descriptive representation matter for substantive representation? Yes, it does. That brings me to the end of my talk. Thank you. Okay, I'm happy. I'm used to this. So it can be questions about anything, more or less. Yes, please. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. To the second question first. We thought of the labels are bad in this diagram. I'll go back to it. We thought of politics as a process, and where different politicians have different trajectories. And as you know, if you apply for research money, you have to have an acronym. And we couldn't find a good acronym, so we thought the pathways metaphor represents pretty much what we had in mind. How do people start, arrive, and then make their way through the institutions in the political system? It does, but in the meantime, we know that there's another migration-related project that also uses that acronym, and but it's yeah, there we are now. It is called Pathways. And we will the foreigners. This I'm simply using the wording from the Albus. It's not my choice of words. I repeat that because it's not a I didn't explain this very well. The upward lines, the two upward lines, or the two dotted lines, suggest rejection of the following statement: foreigners should leave when the jobs are scarce. That is, we do not give them permanent residence. They do not, however long they've been here. We want to, if the economy goes down, we kick them out. That is the brutal version of the guest worker model. And the red dotted line means foreigners should be prohibited from political activity, and there should, after the colon, there should be disagree. The people who disagree with that statement went up quite considerably, and in proportion, the people who agreed went down. But the choice of words here is taken from that particular survey. That particular survey is our only survey that provides the same questions year after year. It's not a panel survey. It's not to the same people. It's a series of cross sections, but it allows us to make certain comparisons over time.
Well, thank you very much. I have two questions, actually. One is about the states where immigrant representation was higher in your presentation. Netherlands appears as almost like an outlier. And if I understood it correctly, Belgium is also a case where we have higher levels of immigrant representation in the parliaments. And when we look at those cases where the immigrant representation was not that high, we have countries like Italy and Spain. Now, the thing that pops up in my mind, those successful cases, if I can use that normative term, they are consociational democracies. And I wonder if consociational democracy has been extended. If in Netherlands there's a new ZO, the immigrant, however you will define that. While those who are not faring that well, these are countries who have a history of dealing with plurality or diversity not particularly well. When we think about secessionist movements in Spain, the division between North and South in Italy, and so on. So summarize that first question or maybe argument, maybe there might be structural factors there, but different structures. I'm not talking about the political system. This is one thing. The second thing is the parties matter, you say, and your argument is based on center-left parties having higher levels of immigrant representation. But when we look at the constituencies, most of the immigrants, they have working class background. Even if they have middle class background, these are people who are refugees, having a history of left-wing activism, even if it is orientated towards the homeland. But second generation will probably grow up in households with left-wing tendencies. So here the question is, maybe the ideology of the parties matter more than the parties as such. And another question there is whether you have data about party membership, because you have a screening process there, and some parties may be more open to immigrants than others.
Yes.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I start with the last question. No, we don't have data on party members. If parties have such data, in France you would be legally not allowed to collect data on ethnicity, for example. The Germans and the British couldn't care less. It's not a relevant category for the parties. They don't have any monitoring regimes in the parties themselves. So we wouldn't be able to find such data. We're having a hard time finding local and regional quotas for these at the moment. Unfortunately not, but it's an important point. The second point, I'm going backwards, is a real problem for us, conceptually and methodologically. And it comes up in all kinds of ways. Are left-wing parties ideologically more likely to accommodate immigrant origin citizens, or is there, for example, a class element, or immigrants simply representatives of a group of people who are would be more likely to be the clientele of left-wing parties? Anyway, and it gets worse. If we look at parliamentary questions, for example, is a green politician who speaks about immigrants and their problems, is that somebody who tries to make a personal point, or is he or she sent by their party to do exactly that because the party wants to present itself as a party that is open, not necessarily to immigrant communities, but to maybe even to the majority community, because and we are facing massive problems as far as causal inference is concerned here. I'm not sure we are ever going to be able to solve them, but we will be working with all kinds of matching samples and control variables, so we can actually at least make draw some reasonable inferences about this. But it's a very, very serious problem, especially because we take parties seriously. Disentangling these different dimensions of partyness, if you like, are extremely, extremely tricky. The first point, I think, is a really important one, you could add another country which would confirm your I think very simple but very suggestive and very convincing and plausible hypothesis, and is Canada. Canada has traditionally had to accommodate French and English-speaking Canadians, and a lot of the practices, the whole notion of multiculturalism that they have, was developed in that, and perhaps also with Native Americans, but in that tension, mostly between English and French-speaking Canadians, and I think there were probably routines and solutions that had been tried and had been discussed for a long time, and you see that in political theory, but you can see that also in administrative practice. Certainly for Belgium, that's the case. Belgium doesn't do quite as well as the Netherlands, but the notion of pillarized society where you have group representation at all sorts of levels, which tends to facilitate other forms of representation, is certainly something that's important. But I don't think so. So I think it shapes the minds of policymakers, and it's a variable that I intuitively don't like because it's causally very far removed from what you find at the outcome. But I think it's a very, very important contextual variable. that we are trying to capture with a number of variables that we call integration regimes. But yes, I think this is a very good point, and I think your point about Spain as sort of the other case where you have a lack of convincing or satisfactory accommodation of ethnic linguistic minorities in the country, and therefore perhaps a more confrontational attitude to these questions in general is a good case in point in my view. No, not necessarily. No, if you have money, it's nice in Switzerland.
Okay. So I have also two questions. One is related similarly to structural factors. So you mentioned that there seems to be no relation, like no significance of structural factors. But I wonder, like, whether you also account for. You mentioned that it actually in the beginning of your presentation, but I haven't seen it towards the end. What about the electoral rules and regulations?
Yeah.
So you yourself acknowledge that, like, the system in first was posed. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Many thanks. Again, very important points. The anti-immigrant, the strength of anti-immigrant parties, and also the activities of anti-immigrant movements we will capture. We don't have the data because one member of our team is underperforming here. I'm not going to speak who is in charge of this, but we will get those data. We will code them from newspapers and as far as sort of demonstrations are concerned, and we will use not the comparative manifesto data, but the Chapel Hill expert surveys to capture the variations along the Galtan dimension. That's a particular scale to measure sort of cultural and I don't know exactly how they translate it, but on one end you have the culturally open, multicultural, cosmopolitan libertarians. On the other hand, you have the traditionalists, nationalists, etc. That is a better way of capturing it. I think for this German case, I've used comparative manifesto data, despite the fact that I agree with you that they predominantly measure the salience of this, because it's the only thing we have over time. We can use other scaling algorithms to come to a better results, but that work hasn't been done yet. The salience of the issue in the population will be captured. We have a whole little group that is interested in A, in salience, and B, in so-called mood measures, mood towards immigration. That is a particularly sophisticated technique developed by Stimson and others in the US to attempt to get longitudinal data on this. I can't report anything about this yet. So yeah, salience-based measures are not the best. Um, Positional measures are better. We will, I think, use expert surveys to do that. They go sufficiently far back for our purposes to do this. I didn't use them here for questions of convenience, basically. The salience in the population, we will have data about this, and the electoral systems play a huge role for us. I didn't speak much about it, but of course there are very but especially the incentives to cultivate a personal vote will matter, and we know that we know this for. I've written a paper on the United Kingdom that shows the constituency link of these MPs quite clearly. We will have demographic data on the district level, which are still in the process of being collected, because you have to break down national statistics into and you sometimes have to estimate the socio-demographic composition, for example, of your district. If there isn't a one-to-one match in the UK, it's easy because all national statistics are presented at the political electoral constituency level. We have some countries that offer you different types of votes, like in the German case, which makes for good allows nice comparisons. So that will play a big role. So far, the only person who's ever done anything on this, that's myself. It shows very clearly that all British MPs are under this particular electoral system sensitive to the percentage of ethnic minorities in their electoral district, and so it goes up like that, and the ethnic minority MPs follow exactly the same track, but a step higher, basically. So there's an additional effect that I didn't want to see, actually, but because I was hoping that the electoral system explains everything, and after that there will be no ethnic difference, but there is one, and I have no idea why it's there, but it is there. But yes, you're right. This will be a crucial part. The electoral systems and the parties, and perhaps in the longer term also the parliamentary rules will be decisive. Sorry. Hi. Hi, Emily. points. The second point first, I think within the next 10, 15 years we will no longer speak of immigrants. We will speak across Europe about ethnic minorities. When we have the third and fourth generation in parliaments, that makes no sense to speak of immigrants anymore. And they may be defined ethnically by religion or all kinds of cultural practices, but so that's at the moment we have that exactly the problem that you're mentioning. That's why we stick in most of what we do so mechanistically and to this definition, immigrant or child of immigrant, with all the disadvantages that you're also mentioning, namely that you lose important information on the country of origin or the region of origin. We have coded the country of origin of the parents and that person if they're immigrants. We have a lot of information in addition to what, however, to that, but it is very hard for us to know how to use this either without causing controversy within our project, including serious legal repercussions for our French colleagues to actually use any notion of minority, religiously defined minorities in their written work that can lead to prosecutions, or at least creates the fear of prosecution amongst them, to normative problems that our Dutch colleagues have, etc. So at the moment we stick to this relatively uncontroversial one. Maria Sobolewska, who's part of our team, works with the notion of visible minorities, and in the UK that means people who are either defined by or can be distinguished by their skin color or by their name. By their skin color, usually the black and the black Afro-Caribbean British MPs, and name people of Asian origin, usually Pakistan and India. So I don't have a good answer for this, except that we discuss this for hours, as you can imagine, and if 20 people get together, you don't find a solution. But that is the minimal compromise, as it were. As far as different types of immigrants are concerned, we find that from our tentative analysis, that it is difficult for a German or an Austrian or a Swiss or are in our sample, but they have quite similar, or Belgian, Turk or Moroccan to get into parliament. So if in some ways if we imagine this to be like a selection model or something, that first part is very hard, and there's discrimination. Whether intentional or not is a different matter. Once they're in, we see we see often a very rapid rise of immigrant origin politicians that are visible to top leadership positions. I mean, and in the British case, it's quite clear. Even in Cameron's cabinet, there's a Pakistani origin economics minister now. In the German case, Philipp Rösler is from Vietnam, or was from Vietnam. The leader of the Green Party is of Turkish origin. The deputy prime minister of Hessen is of Yemeni origin. So once they're in, they actually often rise quite quickly. But up to that, to get to that point, there's some mechanisms that work against them, and of course we're interested to find out what works against them. Methodologically, we have this problem that we have no idea of the eligible pool, as it were. That is, we can see who arrives in parliament, but we have no idea sort of who started, who might have been a good candidate, but thought, no, I'm not going to do that, or never even had the idea of standing for. So that we don't have, and this is very difficult. You can only do this in surveys, very carefully constructed surveys. But as I said, it matters to get into parliament. Up to that point, it seems to be a disadvantage in all countries that we study. And from that point onwards, it doesn't. It may actually be a slight advantage to be visibly different, because you become part of a diverse-looking team, and political leaders like people. Also, of course, very often in the process of getting to these top leadership positions, and I can't say this with a lot of confidence. In that process, these are selection processes within the parties. And you get selected because you are a very good representative of the party. That you are ideologically close to the party, to the center of the party, the median of the party, to the party leadership. So we have a lot more knowledge about women in the Conservative Party, for example. Females who make it into the British House of Commons are hyper blue conservatives. They're ideologically extremely well aligned and will never do anything, or rarely do anything to violate or to jeopardize the unity of the party. So they're very closely aligned in the selection process. That may happen. We don't know that. So it's quite possible that those selection processes are quite interesting. But I think we have to start with a lot of qualitative data. I thank you again for the. I'll take a lot of interesting points away from this, and that this is still a project that is evolving. The data collection is happening, but our thinking is evolving at the moment as we see the data. So it's extremely appreciated, not just by me, but also the colleagues that I mentioned.